Imagine waking up and seeing, right there on social media, the leader of the country not just venting or posting about politics but actually giving direct orders to prosecutors. Orders about who to target, who to indict, and who to let off the hook. Not whispered behind closed doors, not hidden in secret memos but blasted for the world to see. If that doesn't stop you in your tracks, it should. Because once the justice system becomes a tool for political payback, you don't just bend the rules, you break the foundation of democracy itself. And that's exactly what was laid bare in one of the most revealing Senate hearings in years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Former Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who later became the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, gave an address in 1940 when he was Attorney General, and it was titled Federal Prosecutor. He said, while the prosecutor at his best is one of the most beneficent forces in our society, when he acts from malice or other base motives, he is one of the worst. Unfortunately, President Trump, driven by clear malice, ordered the prosecution of James Comey, a prosecution which was rejected by a career Republican prosecutor who had looked at the facts and looked at the evidence for months. In a country devoted to the rule of law, it is simply unconscionable for the president to direct the Justice Department to engage in political prosecutions against the recommendations of a career prosecutor. Maybe you think this is small. Maybe you all know that Comey will win this case, as he said himself, bring it on, go to trial. But to me, it is much deeper than that. Donald Trump posted on social media, and the whole world saw his instructions to the Attorney General to go after his perceived political enemies, including the former director of the FBI, who, by the way, was a Republican-appointed U.S. attorney, served a number of positions under Republicans, was my law school classmate, so I know a little bit about his politics. He ordered the Justice Department to go after the sitting Attorney General in the state of New York, and he even ordered the entire Justice Department to go after a member of this committee. And if that is not chilling to my colleagues and they don't care about this, I don't even know what to say anymore. Pam Bondi came before this committee, and I asked her questions about this, and she said to me, and these are her words, politics will not play a part in our decisions. Here you go. So when Donald Trump couldn't find someone in the Justice Department to bring the charges against Comey, he pushed out Eric Siebert, a conservative Republican, by Mark Warner's account, a prosecutor that was recommended by the Republican governor of the state of Virginia, and he installed a White House aide to overrule the career prosecutors. He is pressuring the Justice Department about whom to prosecute rather than letting the career prosecutor make a decision about the facts and the laws. That's not justice. As former Trump White House attorney Ty Cobb said, we have a president for the first time in history ordering his AG to indict his enemies. And the AG, instead of being the independent force she's supposed to be, is saying, yes, sir. How can I get that done? Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor and conservative commentator, also said that this was a vindictive indictment, incomprehensible, and a mess. You know, I was a prosecutor for 8 years, ran a sizable office, and people would call, hey, don't go after that kid. Oftentimes the kid would be like 35 years old. And not once did I ever go to the career prosecutor and say, get rid of that case, don't do that, oh, have less of a sentence. Because when you cross that line, because you have had that kind of political pressure put on you, you can't go back. You can't go back. You took an oath to represent the government, the people, whether it's a state, whether it is the country, and not to represent in this case, the president. And this is not happening in a vacuum. At the same time, the president directs investigations and prosecutions of his perceived enemies. He gives pardons to and rewards his friends. The administration reportedly shut down an investigation into border czar Tom Homan for accepting a $50,000 cash bribe. The president pardoned January 6 insurrectionists who assaulted police officers in this very building. And he pressured prosecutors to dismiss a corruption case against Eric Adams. It was Hayden Scotton who was the career prosecutor in that case, someone who had clerked for Justice Roberts and then Judge Kavanaugh. And he said this when he was asked to do the dirty work. He wouldn't do the corrupt work. He said, "You will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me." That's what this is about. And all of us, elected by our states, have to look in our own conscience and think, is this going to be me? Am I going to go along with this, or am I going to say something about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very.
Senator Amy Klobuchar put it in stark terms: once you cross the line of using the Department of Justice as a political weapon, you can't go back. The hearing shows us what it looks like when that line isn't just crossed, it's erased entirely. It all started with posts that went far beyond politics. These weren't vague complaints or angry rants, they were specific chilling instructions: go after this person. Target that rival, investigate that official. Among the names singled out was James Comey, the former FBI director. Now remember, this isn't someone from the opposing party. He was a Republican appointee, someone who had worked in Republican administrations, someone even Klobuchar noted she personally knew from law school. Yet even he became a target because he was seen as disloyal. The orders didn't stop there. They included state attorneys general. They even included sitting members of Congress. Think about how bold that is, directing prosecutors to investigate the very lawmakers who are supposed to provide oversight. If that's not a red flag, what is? When those inside the department resisted, when career prosecutors tried to hold the line, they weren't supported. They were pushed aside. Eric Seibert's story makes that clear. Here was a conservative Republican prosecutor recommended by his own state's Republican governor, someone whose credentials and loyalty to the rule of law should have been beyond question. But when he wouldn't cave, when he refused to bend to the pressure, he was out. Replaced not by another seasoned professional, but by a White House aide sent in to override the very prosecutors whose job it was to follow facts and evidence. This wasn't about letting the law guide decisions, it was about loyalty and control. And the message was unmistakable. If you won't do the bidding of those in power, they'll find someone who will. That's where Pam Bondi comes into the picture. She testified under oath before the committee. Her words sounded reassuring, even noble. Politics will not play a part in our decisions. On paper, that's the principle that holds the justice system together. Prosecutors aren't supposed to serve politicians, they serve the people and the law, but Klobuchar tore through the gap between those words and the reality. Because in practice, politics was not just a factor, it was the deciding factor. The cases that moved forward, the ones that got shut down, the people who got targeted, it all came down to political loyalty. Bondi's promise rang hollow against the evidence laid out in hearing after hearing. The pattern is impossible to miss. Enemies faced relentless pressure, friends received protection. Look at the pardons given to January 6 defendants, people who physically assaulted police officers in the Capitol itself. Instead of accountability, they got rewards. At the same time, investigations into allies mysteriously disappeared. The bribery case against Tom H.M. which involved a $50,000 cash payment, was reportedly shut down. And then came the pressure to drop corruption charges against Eric Adams. That wasn't a rumor whispered in backrooms, it was a directive that reached the desks of career prosecutors. For ordinary Americans, these stories should spark outrage, because they prove the justice system wasn't functioning for the people. It was functioning for whoever held the keys to power. But even in this environment, there were moments of resistance, people who showed the courage to say no. One of the clearest examples was Hayden Scotton, a decorated prosecutor with impeccable credentials. He had clerked for Chief Justice Roberts and for Justice Kavanaugh. In other words, he was no partisan outlier. And yet when he was asked to do the dirty work, to dismiss the corruption case against Adams, he flatly refused. His words deserve to be remembered. You will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me. That statement wasn't just about one case. It was about drawing a line in the sand, a refusal to let political corruption poison the rule of law. His courage shines all the brighter when you consider how many others were pushed out or silenced for standing their ground. What makes all of this so dangerous is that it wasn't a one-off scandal. It was a system taking shape, a new normal where the Department of Justice became less about justice and more about loyalty tests. When prosecutors are forced to weigh their next case not just by the evidence, but by how it will play politically, the idea of equal justice under law collapses. It destroys morale inside law enforcement. It weakens the faith of citizens who expect fairness. And it corrodes democracy itself, because once the people lose trust in the justice system, rebuilding it becomes nearly impossible. Klobuchar's testimony drove this point home. This wasn't theoretical, it wasn't abstract. It had real consequences for the integrity of the country. The hearing also revealed the chilling permanence of crossing that line. Once political leaders learn they can bend the justice system to their will, they don't stop. They keep pushing, and every time they succeed, it becomes harder to reverse course. Future leaders remember that precedent. Future prosecutors remember that resistance can end careers. The culture shifts, little by little, until fairness is no longer the expectation but the exception. That's why Klobuchar's final point about conscience was so powerful. She wasn't just talking to her colleagues in the room, she was speaking to every elected official, and in a way to every American watching. Look in your conscience, she said, and ask whether you'll go along or whether you'll speak up. Because silence in the face of abuse isn't neutrality, it's complicity. This hearing clip cuts through the noise and shows us the stakes in real time. It's not about personalities, it's not about party, it's about the health of a system built to protect the people. Oversight isn't a box to check, it's the only safeguard we have to prevent power from becoming absolute. And when you strip away the political theater, what you see here is a lesson in how fragile that safeguard really is. Klobuchar laid it out with clarity and precision, making sure there could be no confusion. This was the misuse of justice for political gain, and if left unchecked, it would undermine the very principle of democracy. Think about the consequences beyond Washington. If corruption cases are dropped for the well-connected, what message does that send to the rest of us? If rioters who assaulted police officers are pardoned while others face the full weight of the law, what message does that send about equality? If prosecutors are punished for refusing to bend, what message does that send to the next generation of lawyers and public servants? These aren't abstract questions, they strike at the heart of whether we believe the justice system is still worthy of our trust. And yet there is hope in the defiance of people like Hayden Scotton. His refusal to compromise reminds us that individuals, even within broken systems, can hold on to their integrity. Every time someone like him says no, it chips away at corruption. Every time citizens pay attention, demand answers, and refuse to be distracted by spin, the balance tips back toward fairness. That's the larger message behind this hearing. The justice system isn't just shaped by those at the top. It's shaped by the choices of everyone inside it, and the scrutiny of everyone watching it. In the end, this moment was more than a Senate hearing. It was a warning shot about the dangers of allowing political power to override the law. It showed how quickly the mechanisms of justice can be bent, how easily loyalty can replace truth, and how fragile trust really is. And it placed a choice before every public servant and every citizen: go along with it or stand up against it. Because the integrity of democracy doesn't disappear in one dramatic collapse, it erodes piece by piece, in hearings just like this one, unless people refuse to let it happen. So if you've made it this far, take a second to really think about what this hearing revealed. It wasn't just about political drama or partisan fights, it was about the core promise of equal justice under law. And whether that promise still means anything is a question that only we, the people paying attention, can answer. And here's where you come in. If you want to keep peeling back the curtain on hearings like this, uncovering the facts behind the theater, and understanding how it all connects to your daily life, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button so more people see this breakdown, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the stories that matter, because this fight for accountability, for integrity, and for the survival of our democracy, it isn't going anywhere, and neither are we.